Walters. I need to put the L. I keep wanting to say Walters, but it's Walters. So Leigh Walters of TRG Screen. Welcome to David Anderson Talking Market Data, the show. We've been going for a little bit now, so I'm so glad to have you guys on board. Let me dive straight in and start off with, I know you well, we've talked over many years, etc. But can you set the scene? Who is Leigh Walters and who are TRG Screen? And you might be so melded together that it's one thing.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Leigh Walters, CEO of TRG Screen. That's a bit of a mouthful. What does TRG Screen do? We help customers manage their spend on market data and information services. I've been at TRG for 8 years, which in market data terms is blink of an eye. I still feel like I'm a newbie in this industry. But prior to TRG, I spent roughly 20 years at what was then Thomson Financial, now LSEG, and also DTCC, the Securities Depository. Across a range of roles, starting in finance through to product, sales, general management, and so on.
So you're very old, really.
Almost as old as you, David, yeah.
Well, that would be going something if you're almost as old as me. A little bit on the background. I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile at the bottom of this if people want to look at that, and I'll put the TRG Screen website there as well so people can look you up. But again, a little bit of background. I remember the Roberts Group, which is what TRG stands for. And then also there was Screen as well. What was the company called? I'm trying to remember what it was called, Screen, because they had different parts to it. And you guys merged. And then I think you're on your second iteration of private equity. We're not going to talk about that in detail. But again, you've got, or maybe we can talk about that as a company. And again, I warned you I was going to do this at the beginning. We're going to talk about three broad topics, but I also want to highlight something at the beginning. The three broad topics that you and I have agreed is big picture, macro market data stuff. What do you think? What do I think? And we'll have a bit of a chat about that. We'll then go a little bit more micro into tools and services, which I think is really in your wheelhouse. And then we'll also then segue into outsourcing and offshoring, which are two things you're doing specifically. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. One thing to kick off with, though, just on TRG Screen, I always think about you in the same category. Inventory management. That's what TRG did with Fitz. It's what Screen did with Infomatch. That's what you do. Nice little pigeonhole. I was talking to Calera recently. You're their competitor. They've got MDM. There's BS. That's what you do.
Yeah.
But I think there's a bit more to it than that.
Well, I spend a lot of my time doing a reintroduction of TRG because we're not that. And like we know all those players in the marketplace, right? I know Alistair and co, and we're all friends. And I'd say that on a point-to-point basis, a point system, there are competitors across our array of different solutions. Love an analogy, and I would say I would look at it a bit like Apple, and that on a point system we have various competitors. So if you have, if we're Apple as an iPhone, there are many other smartphones out there, but we also have the watch. We have the cloud, we have the music, we have the TV, we have the AI agents. So it's a full universe of offerings. I think is what we're talking about rather than a point solution.
Cruel question. Does that make you jack of all trades, master of none?
No, I'd say it makes us a specialist it's almost a layup there. Yeah, a specialist in market data. So I think our vision is that we are very focused on just market data and information.
Right.
And becoming effectively a one-stop shop. So, I think that will come out in our conversation around why would you want to do this yourself, outsourcing, automation. We want to become that one-stop shop.
Okay. Well, let's segue into our first broad topic, which is a broad one, probably crazy broad. The sort of macro picture, market data as an industry. I mean, I've been in this industry 40 plus years. You've been, not quite as long, but you're getting there. My sense, just to kick it off, when I look at the industry, one of the key things that I see as a macro issue is cost control, cost containment. I mean, it's a bit tiring. Is it a bit boring? No, it's not boring. It's not boring, but it is. It drags you down a bit. It's a bit of a negative thing. I remember in the 80s and maybe in the early 90s, there was a lot more growth and innovation.
Even when you're at school, you were
Well,
still involved in marketing.
exactly. As I heard about the bar, but it was different in those times, and now we've really, I mean, a good decade, maybe longer. It's been about cost control, and I think an associated element with that, which I think you guys are very involved with, is counting everything, monitoring everything, keeping an eye on everything, enabling compliant. There's no such thing as compliant. Complying and compliance. Yes, I've made up a new word. So, what are your high level thoughts? Cost control, counting.
Yeah, I'd agree with you in that I've been here 8 years, and the story hasn't really changed. And I would say the size of the problem that we're addressing seems to be getting bigger. So just last week before, I'm sure you saw the articles from Expand and Substantive talking about prices rising 15%, but budgets growing 2%.
I know.
Don't need to be a genius to figure out that 13% gap, which seems to happen every year, you put it in real dollar terms as well. Like, if people are spending 100 million a year on market data, that's a 13 million gap in your budget. So I think, the size of the problem seems to be getting worse, and it's not a new story. But I think as you would also be familiar with, David, it's not just about size; it's what you do with it.
Exactly.
And I think it's that unique combination of size and complexity which makes it problematic. And I think the complexity is getting worse. We see a lot, right? We have a lot of scale. We see that the number of vendors are increasing. The mediums of transport of data is getting more diverse. There are new apps. There are new applications. There's AI coming into the mix. It's going to absorb more data. So it feels like 8 years in, a lot hasn't really changed. People are still talking about the same problems.
But something I picked up on what you just said, there's a lot of new vendors. There are a lot of new vendors doing maybe, and again, does that play into the alternative data space? There's different types of data. There's new types of data. So maybe that's where the new vendors come in.
That's what we see. Yeah.
But on the more classic, traditional data, you mentioned you work for Thomson Financial. I remember, because I used to work for Reuters when it was Reuters, and then I remember when Thomson and Reuters merged, and it became Thomson Reuters.
Oh,
it became Refinitiv, and then now it's else. I mean, there's a lot of concentration. I mean, I slightly worry for the industry that there's a massive and frankly, you've done it as well. TRG and Screen coming together. This M&A activity where you had a number of players out there, and I would have observed that creates competition. There's a little bit more of a market when you get all these mergers, and it's the same on the customer side. UBS and Credit Suisse recently merging. I remember Swiss Bank Corporation. So in First Boston, that was it. Credit Suisse First. I really am showing my age. So there's lots of vendors, but then there's also a concentration of vendors. I mean, how does that play out?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we see the information. I think we have 13 billion of invoices that we process per year across 500 customers. So we can see all the different flavors. But you're right. I mean, I think, the large consumers, concentrate in the big players. Similarly on the producers, it's the usual top 10 producers and the usual kind of top 20 to 30 consumers that, it's that 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule. We see that a lot. I think there probably will be more consolidation over time, but if I kind of learned anything from my Thomson days, who are pretty acquisitive, acquire things, don't normalize the data. And so, you have a different badge on the top of the product, but underneath the naming conventions, the descriptions were still very diverse.
And I think, because I did a bit of consulting when I left Reuters for Thomson Financial, and they had been very acquisitive.
Yeah.
And there were lots and I remember there were issues to do with different sales teams for the different product lines. I think you're right, under the covers, everything was renamed Thomson something, but underneath, but perhaps in some of the documentation and the code and everything, the old product was still there. So I think that has created headaches. But I think going back to what the Pareto rule and everything, I've heard a lot of customer firms talking about managing the long tail, which is yes, you've got, I mean, I'd even dispute your 10 companies at the top. You've got 2 or 3, I mean, let's be blunt. Bloomberg and LSEG, are enormous up there. I know FactSet and actually S&P, having taken over Market, is pretty, but so maybe it's a 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah, there's a few more. Yeah.
But then there's just that. So I'm trying to draw it at long tail. I mean, when you're helping clients, when you're working with clients, is there more focus, more work to be done, more savings to be had on the tail or on the head? If I can mix.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it depends on what the customer wants. So I'm sure we'll talk about outsourcing at some point.
We will.
In some of our discussions with customers and, prospects and customers, some want everything and some want a la carte menu of different flavors. And I think some customers want us to process everything front to back for the medium size providers and the long tail, but they want to hang on to the main providers and keep that close to their hearts. Others want us to do all of the process for, part of the cycle, but, leave out some of the other elements. So I think for us, it's really, there's, as we're also probably talking about, if there's like, a front to back conveyor belt of all the different jobs to be done within market data processing across different sizes and geographies and spectrums, we can adapt that to whatever the customer wants. So some want everything, some want a mixture.
And I think we are going to talk about, the danger is we're going to segue into things that we're going
to...
it doesn't matter. I mean, I think it is an interesting observation. I know one of your pitches, if you will, is that specialization. If you're trying to do lots of jobs and you're a medium-sized firm and a person in that organization is doing that 2 days a week and then they're doing a different job 3 days, whereas maybe you've got somebody whose sole focus is on one of those aspects.
Not one person, many people, and also many, I'd say now, AI tools that don't sleep. But I guess the analogy that I like to use, because in my previous life, is there aren't many hedge funds now that do their own fund administration.
Yeah.
And yet in the market data world, most firms seem to be doing their market data administration. And so I think that's where we're saying, in terms of being that one-stop shop, you hang on to your core, the value add work. Let us take care of the pieces that aren't value add to you.
I mean, let's hold that thought because we're going to talk about outsourcing, offshoring as a service in a second. But that's we've already teed it up for that future content. I mean, staying on the macro topics, you already mentioned. I wondered how long it would take for somebody to mention AI.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, AI is just coming up everywhere. Something you haven't mentioned yet, but used to be on everybody's lips a couple of years ago was cloud. So two big happenings, two big trends. Can you tell the world how you see both of those?
I'll give my opinion. I mean, I'd say cloud is still very important, right? Naturally. And I think we still see that some firms haven't fully adopted it, which, post-COVID feels pretty crazy. But I think cloud is a great enabler. I feel that AI is completely different, transformative. I see it much more like the Industrial Revolution. I think it's going to have huge impact on software companies, on the industry, on society. And I think we're just scratching the surface. And then you combine that with, I was reading about quantum computing this morning, that processing power that's coming with that. And data lakes enabling that. There's so much, I think, on the technology front at the moment that's going to transform everyday jobs, and it will create new jobs. I think there'll be professions and work that we don't even imagine at this point.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think I would add in, I see that cloud was an enabler. I think cloud was a stepping stone.
Yeah.
I mean, cloud is really just data warehousing, data sites or whatever. They're owned by somebody else. So it wasn't that revolutionary, but it was a powerful tool. And then your quantum computing comment. But even before we get to quantum computing, there's so much been going on with, GPUs and whatever, hardware power and whatever, the power of computing has got so much better. So the cloud and the increase in the power of computing has made AI. I mean, one of my first guest on this podcast was Brennan Carley, who I used to have lots of conversations with. And he used to tell me, look, David, AI is not new. He was studying it when he was at university in the 70s. But it required so much computing power. that it just wasn't practical. So I agree wholeheartedly, and I think we've got to embrace it. I think it's scary, but it's inevitable. So
Yeah.
you just
I mean, if you see some of the latest releases, it's kind of terrifying for some of us old timers,
I
right?
know.
And you see it doing tasks that would take weeks and weeks. And from an analogy perspective, I kind of go back to my early accounting days when, believe it or not, I started doing manual daybooks, adding up
Yeah.
columns of data in a physical book with a calculator with a printer. Then I brought in Lotus 123,
Yeah.
precast to do Excel, and what took days took minutes, and any changes were done instantly. It's kind of the same thing, right? Not trying to dumb it down too much, but what we're seeing in terms of like the productivity gains internally, but then I think the internal gains and internal efficiency we see now as sort of table stakes. Everyone should be using it for code development, GitHub, Copilot, across everything from support to development and everything in between. That's table stakes. Where we need to get to next is removing jobs to be done by humans with agentic AI, automation, various forms of AI. And I think that's the next frontier of where AI will make some savings.
And I think AI permeates into so many different parts of the market data industry. I mean, that automation. I mean, you guys are really heavily involved in the process, the administration side of the market data world, and AI can absolutely be applied to that.
We're already doing it.
Yeah,
So it's not
it'd be
handy.
crazy,
It already is.
not to. And I think I was talking the most recent podcast, the one that came out earlier this week, episode 13. Unlucky for some, hopefully not unlucky for Debbie Lawrence. But Debbie was talking about using it for data discovery. I mean, one of the successes, but the problems the industry creates, we've got so much data, and you and I were talking. There's so much diversity to that data. That's good.
Yeah.
But then, how do you find it? How do you find that in a manual way? That would take forever. So I think data discovery, but then what are the risks? What do you worry about apart from losing? I mean, I think it's Gemini 2 from Google now will create a podcast. You just write a few things and it will generate the podcast. So I'm out of a job.
Am I actually talking to David Anderson? I'm not sure.
I'll sort of, but
yeah, we're very involved in AI, and I think we said we wouldn't talk about private equity ownership, but I think I'll mention one thing, which is that's part of the benefit we have of being part of that larger universe of 85 companies in the portfolio is we have the scale of that, and so we get all the cutting edge learning, shared best practices. So that enables us to fast track that AI drive. But one of the key things we need to make sure we're doing, and my CPO will make sure I am saying this, is that we are also doing it in a very controlled, governed way.
Guardrails,
exactly.
That's the phrase.
And so making sure that, you've got the legality, the rights to do certain things, you're holding information in a secure format, and also giving clients the option to opt in, opt out if you want to use it or not. And so that's why I think for us, even though we built several tools already, the rollout of that is very closely managed in lockstep with our customers that are in the pilot stages, because to go full scale launch, you need to make sure that you have all of those control areas fully covered.
No, I think that's something the whole industry is going to be watching. I mean, you touched on something, another element. I mean, we talked about data discovery, we talked about automation of processes and admin, but IPR, intellectual property rights, for our industry has always been who owns the data? What are you allowed to do with the data? Yeah. And AI radically affects that. So again, a big topic.
Yeah. And I'll say there's lots of misunderstanding, misconceptions around what the data is being used for. And for example, things like, is the data being used to train some of the LLMs?
Yeah.
The answer is no, right? Once the LLM is released, it's locked. And so I think there's lots of misconceptions, lots of fear about it. And so we need to educate the marketplace and give them those clarifications on you're fine to do this or you're not fine to do this, and here are the risks, and here's the pros and the cons. So I think it's a managed rollout for us in that we have various tools we may touch on some of them. But it's a kind of a tread gently, and there are humans involved in every step to make sure there's quality control, and I guess compliance around it as well.
I mean, we're almost at that segue into the tools discussion. I mean, is there anything else, do you think, that you see that's a macro topic that we haven't covered?
I mean, a couple of other topics. I think we hear a lot about data lakes, and I think they kind of goes hand in hand with AI, and I think
and cloud
and cloud, absolutely. Yeah. I think our experience is that if you haven't got your data in a good shape, AI is much less productive. So having a centralized, normalized data set of structured, unstructured information, metadata describing what it is, dare I say a taxonomy, which, there's a few of those that are out there, and, we will be.
We love these buzzwords, don't we?
Exactly. But if you've got, a centralized repository, and for us, that covers multiple products and tools. So spend, usage, compliance, other information, and metadata on that looks standardized, then AI can really be powerful. I think if you've got your data in many different islands across different products, geographies, departments, it's much harder to access it. So I think data lakes is another big push, and APIs to make sure that everything is kind of in sync as well.
Yeah, no, good. I think we are segueing into the tools and services. And I mean, I think I would bring up an area that tools are being applied to is digital rights management, DRM. Yeah. Which the industry, I've watched this unfold, and I don't think the industry's actually got to a solution yet on that. And to your taxonomy point, and it was something I was talking about with Debbie Lawrence, episode 13, just gone. She was describing there's a red flag word that turns everybody off, which is standardization. There's this, let's standardize, let's make everything the same, which sounds like a good idea, but how can you do it?
Well, I think it's a great idea. I just don't think it will happen in the short term, at least. And I think that's where I think software companies and AI can normalize this information. You can create a backbone or a spine, and then have a translation layer to map it to what the customer wants to use it for. Because we have customers that have 3 descriptions of the same thing internally, and then they have obviously link into our system or systems. So I think having one standard for everything, I think, is probably not going to happen in the near term.
Debbie brought up the concept, and I've heard this mentioned, of trying to at least agree on some common language. Yeah. I think standardization scares some firms, especially those selling data, that they're going to be forced to have the same terms and conditions, the same rules and they don't want that. They want to be able to define their own rules. But you just said it. What you call something, even within one firm, 3 different firms. And I presume when one talks about a taxonomy is effectively a naming. I mean, I know that word, but I'm not sure I really know that word. I'm going to put you on the spot. Define taxonomy.
Yeah, I had put me on the spot. I think there's a lot of confusion between like a taxonomy and a catalog. And I think for us, taxonomy is really linking towards that naming convention and metadata. Yeah. So, the fields that we hold of information, they have the same tags so that everyone knows that this is a particular type of data delivered in this particular medium. The naming of it and the naming of the vendors, for example, that is also a bit of a minefield. We see multiple flavors. For example, how many different ways do you think people could spell Bloomberg? We see about 20 different ways, just, across some simple information. So I think standardizing, labeling, and so on, that's really, I think, is the taxonomy, kind of, a unique string. Then I think you can then hang.
I'm going to throw a naming convention at you that I've come across. TRG. I've always thought the Roberts Group, but you use the Realization Group.
We do, yeah. We use
TRG. Right.
And obviously, I saw Ollie Cadman doing his podcast a few weeks back, and he was at TRG, the other TRG, for a while.
I know
it's an incestuous space, the market data world.
It definitely is. But so again, going back to tools and services, what's the difference between a tool and a service?
Well, I wasn't expecting that question.
No, it just popped in my head as I was.
I guess, how would I describe that? I would say that you have obviously a variety of tools, and then you have services that maybe sit on top of those or sit around those that use those tools. Right. So again, I'll maybe make up an analogy, but like a gardener you could use one tool, you could use one spade or shovel for every job in the garden, probably not going to be the most productive. You're going to hit a certain limit of efficiency, but also you should use all those tools, but maybe you're better off getting a team of gardeners that know how to use those tools better than.
And one who's good at hedge trimming, another one does mowing, and another person knows how to plant new flower. Yeah.
And that's where I would say that's where we try to differentiate is we have a range of tools, but we also have experts that know how to use those tools, in some cases better than the individuals that we sell them to individually.
You can sell the tool. You can sell a spade or a pitchfork, a hammer to a firm, but then you're saying, but look, we really know how to use pitchforks, hammers, and spades, and especially our particular ones that we've just sold you. So tools, right. Spades, pitchforks, hammers. What are your tools? I mean, inventory management, fits, and it was Infomatch, which I now think goes into Optimize. Is it Optimize or Optimizer?
Optimize spend.
Yep. See, I've been paying attention.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I won't go through the details of every product. This is not meant to be a market.
I know, but a little quick.
But at a high level, we would say we put them into three large groups. So spend management, largely the inventory systems. Usage management. So so the spend is showing you what you have with whom. Usage is if and how it's being used.
Got it.
Which is the next frontier of, it's great that I know I've got this thing and I know that this person still works here. Are they using it and how are they using it?
Yeah.
The third one is, are they allowed to use it? So compliance.
Yeah.
So a simple example might be all around managing your subscriptions and making sure you're right sized with your vendor. In some cases, people are undersubscribed and then they have a compliance risk or they're not reporting correctly. So I think it's spend, usage, compliance combined. That are sort of the main tool groups. But then also why don't you have a service layer with experts wrapping around those things? Because we feel we can extract more value from our tools because that's all we do. We're specialists.
We're going to talk about outsourcing, offshoring, and as a service, but we're teeing it up. But just dwelling on the tools of those, spend, usage, compliance. Where do you see the most activity, the most angst, the most pain, the most opportunity? I mean, what?
Okay, I think we would say that majority of medium to large firms have a spend system of some kind, either ours or some others.
Yeah.
We don't see a large penetration in usage products. We feel like that's probably the biggest frontier of savings that's not been tapped into at this point. And I think somewhere in between the two on compliance tools, and then services around it, we're pretty low penetration. Most people are doing this themselves. So I think the analogy we always going to go back to is it's a bit like the Henry Ford analogy of most people trying to fill that 13% gap by running faster. They're looking for a faster horse.
Yeah.
And we're saying that's only going to get you so far. You don't need a faster horse. You need a car or an AI enabled car at this point. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring more innovation to the overall process rather than just trying to run faster, doing anything.
Isn't that the difference between efficiency and effectiveness? Efficiency is doing things better, but effectiveness is doing the right things. I mean, obviously you want to be efficient and effective is the perfect combination. But anyway, that's a rabbit hole to go down. But usage is an interesting thing because again, I'm thinking back, showing my age, my days in Reuters, it was DAX, data access control system was the tool that Reuters deployed and still do deploy. That seems to be, and then you got, I always get these letters wrong. EMRS, I think, is the one from Bloomberg. So, I mean, what's going on in usage? What are the trends? What are you seeing? I'm not as on top of that as I probably should be.
Well, I think it's, if you break down a typical customer's consumption and they're consuming various different types of data through various different medium, whether it's through screens, hence the name, terminals, whether it's real-time data feeds, whether it's static reference data, and so on and so on, research, so on and so on. All these different categories of data and information that people are consuming, and subscriptions, and even hard paper subscriptions still exist, the pubs and subs piece. All various different mediums, all different spend categories that people are consuming. And we're not talking small money here. We're talking hundreds of millions, right? You guys know better than I would. What we're trying to do is kind of go across each of those categories and say, how can we shine a light on those? Not just what you have, with whom and who's consuming it, and all the kind of the cost allocation process, but are they actually using it? And I think in the old days, say, right, David works in London, he's in the equity department, he's got a Bloomberg, he's got a FactSet, he's got these data feeds, so on and so on. Oh yeah, but he left the firm 6 months ago. That was kind of like the spend management piece. The usage piece is that, yeah, David's got all these tools and subscriptions. He's not using half of them. And so the ones that he is using, he's not using to full capacity. And so it's not even just about cost. It's also about making sure that you're getting the best data at the right time from your vendors, because the data is really valuable. Make sure you're getting the best value out of it, and you're getting alpha from that information you're subscribing to.
But isn't it sometimes the case that somebody's got access to a particular data just in case? It's like, yeah, they haven't used it for 3 months, but they have it there because if the gold market goes crazy, they need to have immediate access to it. And again, in saying that, have I asked my own question again? Data on demand, in other words, that's something I've heard, DAX on demand or whatever. In other words, the way most data providers, when I was selling data, you signed a contract to have access in the future. You didn't pay in arrears for what you used. You pay in advance for the right to access something, and you decide on that based on what you think you might want to look at in the future.
Yeah. And I think all of those payment methodologies still exist in various flavors, right? I think I designed some of them back in my Thomson day. In those kind of examples, if we surveyed you as a consumer, people still send out surveys.
Yeah.
What are you going to say? Do you need this? Do you use this? You're going to say yes. But I think using that information, but then combining it with real data, saying that actually he was on this particular terminal, but he was just chatting, or he was just looking at the sports news, that's maybe not so valuable.
And I suppose forcing somebody like that to at least re-justify. If it's shown, look, Fred, you're not using it, I haven't used it for 6 months, come on. And by the way, the managing director of this division is got an eye on all this. But if they can say, actually, I had a really good reason for that, and here's my reason documented, then fine. They keep it, but you force the issue. Touching on that a bit further, you mentioned the taxonomy question. We were talking offline about benchmarking, which is an interesting area. Funnily enough, I'm going to be talking to Expand on one of my podcasts shortly. I was talking to Alistair Brooker at Calera about what they've been doing with Expand. I know there's substantive researcher out there as well. I know you guys have dabbled in benchmarking as well. I mean, give me your high-level thoughts on benchmarking and then some more specifics. I'm a little bit of a cynic.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay. I'm not. I'm a convert, and in my previous life, we had benchmarking products, and they were fantastic. I feel like it's another frontier of savings. So what we offer today is right-sizing your own footprint based on your own usage patterns. So making sure you see what you've got with whom, if and how it's being used, are you compliant, and get the efficiency out of using those tools and so on. The next wave is, well, how do I compare to someone that's very similar to me?
Yeah.
And that apples to apples comparison is very, very difficult. There are specialists out there to do that. I think for us, we want to be Switzerland, right? All the people you just mentioned, I think I've met in the last couple of weeks, right? So we're all in the same universe. We all know each other. We all like each other, despite what people might think. And we're willing to work with anybody. So, Expand and Vendex and Substantive and 3DI and so on and so on. All these firms that have various different flavors and offerings, we would link in with them, partner with them. So that's kind of where we exist. And it's really driven by what our customers want us to do.
And again, that Switzerland point, another couple of phrases I would throw in are frenemies, cooperation. Yeah. It's where, you might compete with one of those in a very specific area, but then there's areas of cooperation. And I think that cooperation at a technical level is where you talked about APIs and taxonomy. So I think it's the ability for different entities, different organizations with their different systems to be able to talk to each other and leverage each other. And I think that's exciting. Is that happening? I mean, don't go give away any secrets to your negotiations or conversations, but I mean, I think it is happening.
Yeah, of course. Like we're talking to all of the players you just mentioned, right?
And what are the dangers of that? I mean, because you are, we are all friends. It's not personal, but we compete. So, what are the dangers of that? Not dangers. Is that the right word? What are the difficulties? What are the obstacles to that? What are the things, the guardrails for that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of those companies you just mentioned, including us, are commercial entities. So, we all need to make sure we're acting in the best interests of our own businesses, but also we need to act in the best interests of our customers. And it's really, they're what really pay our salaries. So we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the customers, and then our business will take care of itself. I also think there's just a bigger picture out there that if you look at the universe of market data processing and the tools available, I still think there's a lack of awareness of this industry and the tools that are out there. I think if you know FISD pretty well, go to some of the events, it's usually the same vendors, the same firms we've seen for the last 10 years. There are many, many firms out there, thousands, hundreds of firms, and vendors that don't know this environment even exists.
Okay.
And so that they are inefficient in their processing and management of data. And the more awareness that all of us can create and collaborate on to make sure there are industry standards, I think we're very happy to kind of be in the middle of that, working with all the different players, because I think it's better for the greater good.
And the Hackney's phrase, "A rising tide raises all boats." I think that applies, and competition is healthy. It expands it. If you knock on the door and pitch an idea, and even one of those companies comes on pitches the same idea, that has made that customer more aware of that idea. That they have to pick between the two of you. But I think that's healthy and what have you.
Yeah, and I'd say with benchmarking, it shines more light and transparency, and therefore that highlights things, and we can say, well, we've got the tools to help fix those.
What about all these suppliers of data, the big data aggregators, the exchanges? How are they playing in this game? I mean, it's sometimes, rightly, wrongly, whatever you want to say it, I'm not taking a position. Criticism is hurled at them. You make your policies too complicated. You're too stringent. You're too inflexible. You charge too much. All of the same old stories. What's your? I don't want to get into trouble with anything because I'm friendly with all of them. You're friendly, but I mean, give any observations, thoughts, advice.
I mean, again, like I've been on that side as well, right? In my Thompson, was selling data information across a whole range of different things. I mean, I would say there's a lot of press out there, a lot of conversations. I won't dig into too much of that. I think they all have their own value propositions, right? And I think if there wasn't value in what they were selling, people wouldn't be buying it. And so I think making sure you're right sized on your contracts and you're getting alpha from the right data, I think that's what we exist to do, is to make sure you're getting the best and most efficient use of that information. There's obviously going to be lots of information out there, lots of data from lots of different providers. I think part of the issue is that they also struggle with standards. They've also made lots of acquisitions, and how do they normalize data? How do they make sense of it all? Because the complexity that the consumers have, so do the providers. And so in a nirvana state where everyone's talking the same language, everyone's got the same debits and credits, maybe a lot of this market data world wouldn't exist. And I obviously listened to Alan Ross and CJC, distributed ledger. I came from that world, right? I came from settlement where distributed ledger technology makes perfect sense. You're literally moving a debit and a credit from one account to another. And if it didn't work there, I think it's a great idea. I just don't know if it will ever take off.
Gosh, that whole distributed ledger technology, blockchain conversation. I had Brendan Carley again. He's one of these really, he doesn't believe in DLT or blockchain at all. But then Alan, who's a good friend of mine, is absolutely convinced it's great. So I'm. That's why I got no hair. I keep tearing my hair out because I'm trying to work out what
exactly.
The right answer is.
I feel that pain.
Yeah. I mean, compliance. I mean, that which is what I know Alan's trying to help with or play into. That you had spend, etc. I've forgotten your middle point for a second. It'll come. I'll have to rewatch the video. Usage. That was the point. I'm nearly 67, so I lose track of conversation. Compliance. I mean, highlights in the compliance area?
Well, I mean, they're all linked, right? So I think that's kind of the reason we have those different offerings, is because they're all connected. Because the policies and the data rights, it's a bit of a minefield. And so for both the providers and the consumers, trying to match up and reconcile what I'm allowed to use, how much I should be charged for this, am I over or am I undersubscribed, have I fallen into, if I made a mistake, am I going to get audited and get fined? Like, we're shining a light on that to try and, I guess, ensure that if we give transparency into the various different data rights and policies from your providers, of which there's a big variety, making sure that in your contracts that we store, the metadata on those contracts and the data rights within that is stored in a structured format that you can actually query. And is it perfect? No, not yet. I also think that's another segue to where AI will come in the future, is that right now it's not, I'd say, fully capable of making decisions and analyzing contracts and making those decisions. But the rate of pace and change we're seeing, I could see it driving standardization, helping with metadata, helping make decisions. So the speed of, where we get customers say, can I use this? Can I use this index data? And the answer is yes, no, or maybe. And most of the answers are maybe, we hear. And so therefore, how do you get more binary decisions on the maybe part?
But you don't have to get perfection to get benefits. I mean, to your yes, no, maybe, if 20%, 30%, 40% of the answers are yes or no, and 60% are maybe, you still 40%.
Oh yeah, it still carves out some of it. You're still dealing with exceptions, but you want the exceptions to be exceptions, not two-thirds.
Not the rule. Look, I'm conscious of time. Outsourcing, offshoring, and the as a service. We're hearing a lot about this as a service, that market data as a service, I think is the phrase you've been using, but we've had software as a service for a long time, network as a service, platform, everything as a service. I mean, hit me with your thoughts on that whole area.
Yeah, well, I think we touched on a little bit earlier on around the kind of the hedge fund and fund admin analogy. I'd use the same analogy here, which is like for customers, we're hearing more and more they want to focus on their core principle. So if you're an asset manager or a bank, you're focusing on your customers' investment returns, and you need market data, of course, right? That drives your alpha. But the processing of the admin side of it, then there's a whole obviously long conveyor belt assembly line of market data processing. Some parts we're not interested in getting involved in because they should stay with the customer. For high value, high touch vendor negotiation, sourcing of data, for example. But the processing and the administration side of it, we feel that, we have a great offering where we can offer that at a much, better service than maybe some companies can do it in-house themselves. The way we would see it is, if you look at our managed service today, we've broken it down into the various jobs to be done in the life cycle of processing market data, commercial terms, I'd say. We have humans doing that work. Customers have humans doing that work. There are, labor arbitrage ways you can kind of, get more efficient on that, and you have scale benefits. And we feel like, with the scale we have, because we're 500 customers, we see it all. And so therefore, by being a specialist, we can do things faster, higher quality, sometimes more efficiently as well. That combined makes it a valuable proposition. What we're now moving on to is saying, that's great. Breaking it down and having economies of scale is the classic stuff we were learning decades ago. But now we're getting to the point where you break down that assembly line of market data, like a car factory, and elements of that we're already now doing through automation and various AI tools. That has to be done within, obviously, the guardrails we talked about earlier on to make sure that's all safe and secure. But over time, I can see that assembly line, in the same way that cars are made today, most of those elements on that assembly line will have robotic.
Which is what's happened in the car. It's a good analogy because that has. I mean, I suppose
and you still have humans involved in the process, quality control, checking, and so on. And right now, majority of that is still humans. But we already have several robotic tools on invoicing, on contracts, that are making sure that process is much more efficient and actually higher quality, because The robots are available
Well, why?
24/7. They
Okay,
don't sleep.
why couldn't the customers buy the robots off you? You know, why pay you to operate the robots?
And that's probably our next podcast.
Yeah,
Is that's the future, right? Is that right now we feel that at this earlier stage we need to have our arms around those different
yeah,
tools because we can control them. We control the guardrails, and it's a safe environment. We can control it. The next wave in our product roadmaps will be not just offering software, but offering robots that can use the software on your behalf. And I think I was talking to somebody else about it the other day is fast forward a few years time and it will probably be computers using computers,
yeah,
if that makes sense. So
yeah.
you're going to have agents controlling cursors, screens on software applications. And that then has a big impact on software development and product teams. User experience will change. So, we and our other many firms get feedback from our user groups all the time about make the product easier, fewer steps to get to the outcome. If you're not using the software interfaces anymore and you have robots, agents controlling the cursor, moving around the screens that can do it in a blink of an eye, does it matter if it takes 10 clicks when you're not doing it? So I think there's a huge amount of innovation on software, product, user experience that we're only just at the early stages of. And I feel like we're at the front edge of that curve
No.
because, we're one of 85 software companies in the portfolio that it's an existential threat and opportunity. So we're deep into this. But it's evolving by the week, by the month.
Does that mean that your service offering is more applicable to a medium to smaller firm? Because if there's a big firm, a bulge bracket firm, don't they already have economies of scale in their own little world? Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair observation. It's not actually what we're seeing. I think we're seeing it across the board. I think, for some smaller firms, they see they've got a problem. Sometimes, not always, they see they've got a problem that, back to where we started, the big picture, prices going up, the budget's not going up. How do they solve the problem? They haven't got the teams to implement, use, run, extract the value from the various tools that are available. So they just say, you run it for us, you give us the output and you tell us where we need to make the savings and we'll execute those. So that's kind of how the smaller, medium-sized firms are generally dealing with us, is like you become that one-stop shop. I think for the larger firms, it's much more a la carte. Is what we hear a lot is market data is becoming a bit of a niche, hard skill set to learn. And there's not a lot of youth coming through that are replacing people that have been in the industry. But
I think they need some training there, Leigh. I think that's.
Well, we
I
know
think I should do that.
people can do that. Exactly. And maybe we'll be talking to you as well. But I think for the larger firms, it's kind of lifting out pockets of functionality. And yeah, you're right. They have scale. Many of the large firms have their own outsourced or insourced nearshore, offshore offerings and mirror what we do. We're obviously larger because we do it, for many, many firms. But again, it's back to the next frontier of savings. Yeah.
And there are two distinct elements here. There's outsourcing and there's offshoring. I mean, the outsourcing, I always remember a good friend of mine, I'm going to mention his name. I think he's at Datagun now. Simon Brain said this at a conference maybe 20 years ago. You can't outsource a problem. You can only outsource a solution. And what he meant by that, if you don't know how to solve the thing, just throwing it at another company and asking them sometimes, you've got to understand and agree with the process, but then agree that somebody else is more efficient at doing it. I mean, any thoughts on that? I mean, I can see your face. Maybe you're thinking can outsource a problem.
I'm not sure I fully agree with that. I mean, if you're small, mid-sized hedge fund and you're spending tens of millions on market data, but you don't have a market data team and you don't know how to do any of this,
then
you're going to hire loads of people to figure it out and then pass it to someone else. I mean, just give it to someone.
Simon, you were wrong. You were wrong, Simon.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll speak to Simon soon and we can have a good discussion about it.
He said that a long time ago, but I think that's an interesting one. Then offshoring. I mean, I've done a couple of trips now to Bangalore, And there's a massive market data community out there. Lots of firms, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and then in Hyderabad, India, and I think also in Manila. If you remember Thomson Financial, I think had a lot of. I think
We
FactSet
did.
have a lot.
Yeah.
And
Big
so
office in Manila.
these offshored centres, and you guys have just put a big group of people in
In Bangalore.
Bangalore.
Yeah.
Horrible traffic, lovely people, horrible traffic. Talk us through that, the difficulties, the opportunities.
Without getting into the inner workings of the sausage, we sell the sausage to the customer. They don't necessarily want to see how it's made.
Yeah.
Some do, but for us, there are multiple ways to offer a great outsourced type of solution. There's people, there's AI tools. On the people side, we have a mixture of onshore, nearshore, offshore resourcing. I actually don't like the term of Center of Excellence or GCC.
People can get insulted by that.
Yeah,
or offended,
I feel like we just have various offices around the world that
Yeah.
offer different tasks and different expertise. And yeah, for us, we need to make sure that we have people in market, close to customers, relationships, expertise in market. And that suits that very, very well. We have nearshore and we have offshore.
What's nearshore? What's an example?
Nearshore
of
for us would be places like Belfast, for example,
Yeah.
that in the UK, but not London
Not
prices.
Yeah.
And so we have all of those different flavors, and and to be honest, they kind of commingle and blend over time, and we'll continue to have all different flavors because they all bring different levels of value. What I see now is, if you go back to some of the old Thomson days in Manila and when India and Philippines and things was just starting up, people were doing it for cost. To be very blunt, we see it now that the quality and the speed and the expertise you're getting in Bangalore, for example, is as good or better than anywhere else. There's a market data hub, as you know very well, in Bangalore right now, where our customers have people, we have people, they're market data experts, and the quality of the work is fantastic.
I know. I mean, I think that feeds on itself. It's why London and New York have been successful over multiple decades, is because there's a concentration of expertise. Right. And I think you're getting that in places like Bangalore. I'm sure people don't want people switching massively between firms, but it's healthy. That actually creates a growth. And there's a lot of people there. We had an FISD event. I ran one last year in Bangalore. My colleague Peter Tinney just ran one in Hyderabad, which is another center. So I agree with you. I think there's a very clever bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, Deepak, who runs our managed service, was on one of your panels in Hyderabad, and the number of attendees is huge. So I think it's a growing market in India.
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting times. Look, let's sort of sway towards the end and wrap ups. I mean, on big picture, tools and services, and then outsourcing offshore. I mean, any gaps or things that we haven't talked about in any of those three before we get into, and I'll warn you, the big, right, what do you see in the future? What's the big picture for the future? That's what I'm going to come to, so you can think about it while you're answering those other things. You're multitasking.
Yeah, I think we covered it all. I feel like what the industry needs is not a faster horse. Right? That's the message I'd say from today is we just can't keep running faster, or we can't keep doing the same things and expecting different results. But I also think we have to be realistic about what there's going to be in the short to medium term. Like I think we'd all love there to be one data right standard, one utility almost, or distributed ledger technology that means that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. I don't see that in the short to medium term, and therefore I feel like let's use all the right tools that are available and the best technology that's available to make it as efficient in the short to medium term. That's kind of where I see the market going.
I see the same, and I think something you mentioned earlier on, the whole APIs, when we were talking about all these different firms, corporation, frenemies, whatever it is, if they are to talk with each other, having APIs, I think normalization was another phrase you used, obviously taxonomies and whatever. So I think getting all these tools to connect with each other, but then to be able to understand what each other's talking about. I think
that's half the battle is understanding the information. And that's a lesson for us is giving someone the tools and the data is one thing, but you need to be able to analyze it and take the value. It's the so what test of, okay, I've got these great tools, I've got this information. So what now? What do I do with it? And I think that's where AI and us managing the process means that you can offer up the value on a plate rather than saying, here you go, dig away, fish in these ponds here, see what you can find. It's, here's a fully cooked fish on a platter that you can digest. That's where we're trying to get to.
So
more analogies.
A final thought. Any final thoughts? You can say we've said it all if you want, but if there's anything you wanted to finish on, bearing in mind you've got your marketing people, a bit of a final sales plug. Give it your best. Why should everybody come and give bucket loads of money to TRG Screen, Leigh Waters in particular? There you are.
It'd be nice if it came to me personally, but I'm not sure that's allowed.
I think it should.
I think the classic, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. I think it's back to the beginning. It's that 13% delta between 15% price rise, 2% budgets. If anyone's feeling anything like that, well, if you're just trying to run faster, it's not going to work. And so I think that's where we're saying to get to the next frontier of savings, you need to go beyond just doing spend management or just doing usage or just doing compliance. You need to have all of those tools operating in sync and preferably with an expert managed service around it, because then you extract the value from those tools even more. That's the pitch.
And I think going back to your horse riding faster, I think another cliche is it's not about working harder, it's working more cleverly. Is that the phrase? Or better? Yeah, smarter. That's what I knew I was searching for something. Work smarter, not harder. Yeah. Leigh, it's been a pleasure. Hope you've enjoyed yourself. I've enjoyed this.
A few random questions I wasn't expecting.
Well, that makes it more fun. Yeah. I mean, they weren't meant to catch you out. They were just thoughts that popped into my head, and I thought you answered them beautifully. So thank you very much for this. I'm going to stop the recording now.